Hello, everybody. Let me just start the meeting officially because it's time. And while I'm talking, I hope people will enter the room and I can see that's what's happening. So basically, there will be another 5 people, I think, from the CUDAN group. Today is the CUDAN Open Lab Seminar that is dedicated to a lab encounter. And it's sort of a kind of not 2 labs meeting, but a society and the lab. Like the lab is us, the CUDAN Open Lab, and the society is the Digital Humanities Society of Estonia, which is actually a very vibrant group of people, which I already had the pleasure to meet at various circumstances, summer school in Tartu, other places like Istigis, where there was some overlap at the National Library. And so there's a lot of research going on in this area. And obviously one of our goals within the CUDAN research group / CUDAN Open Lab / the CUDAN Era Chair, as no matter how you want to see it, is our mission to integrate with the regional infrastructures, with the regional people, to reach out and basically do what we can to not only sort of like have a home in Estonia and working with people internationally, but also sort of like act as an enzyme in this kind of mutual connection. And of course, I have absolutely zero doubt that we're just one node, one enzyme among many enzymes. And so many of you will be familiar with Peter Tinitz, for example, already, who does a lot of really interesting events. But so basically, I'm very happy that this is happening today. So now I think the great majority is here. So so in case there's a camera cut, let me start it again. So CUDAN Open Lab today meets the Digital Humanities Society of Estonia. And we were going to jump in very quickly into our program because our first speaker actually has to take off at 2:15, I've heard. So basically, I'm not saying too much at the beginning. I give you a little intro of what the structure of today's session will be. So in the first half hour, but you know, it's sort of, you know, we're not too pressured in time, but basically that's the idea. A number of practitioners from the Digital Humanities Society Estonia will sort of present their work. First will go Piret Vires, who is a colleague here at Tallinn University, Digital Literature Studies, Digital Culture. So we should actually talk more and hang out more also like locally. Peter Tinitz, who's from the University of Tartu and the National Library of Estonia, who does text mining, historical corpora, library data, and he's already, you know, the sort of representative of the flavor of digital humanities means something different in every country. Here in Estonia, it also means science, economic, social science, art, statistics. So it's a little bit more on the sciencey side than it may be in different parts of the US. So it looks more like in Germany, for example. So that's already really closely aligned with what CUDAN is actually doing. Then the next one would be Mari Sarf, who is from the Estonian Literary Museum. He does specialize on runic song tradition and folklore archives. I'm very happy about that too. Then Tanjal Seemre, who's now at Tallinn University, and not only is an archaeologist and visual anthropologist, but also I think the scout for what's happening with data and computational infrastructure at Tallinn University, which is another interesting kind of practical interface to CUDAN, not only a topical one. And then Andres Kimber, who is on the Estonian National Heritage Board, University of Tartu, who's an archaeologist, and he's interested in human environment interaction and GIS, meaning geographical information science or systems. That's always a kind of matter of interpretation. And so we also have met before, so it's great to have you here. And then anybody who has not been listed here, who is happy to chip something in from the Estonian DH Society, you're welcome to say more. And then once this is done, at 2:30 or so, we will, or whatever time it takes, we will introduce ourselves from the CUDAN group, and then there will be open discussion. Let's see what we come up with. And but I don't want to steal more time because Pirit Viris has limited time. So the stage is yours. You should be able to share the screen and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Max. It's nice to be here, and I'm really sorry because my lecture starts at 2:15, so I'm a very, very brief introduction of me and my research. I'm working here at Tallinn University in the School of Humanities, and I'm a professor of Estonian literature. But besides teaching and doing research in the field of Estonian literature, my personal, how to say, passion or hobby has been digital literature for about 20 years. And I have been following the developments in the field, in the study of digital literature, starting from hypertext literature, going on to some kind of multimedia projects, and now recently my last article is about social media literature, like Instagram poetry and things like that. And besides that, I have been quite active also internationally. I am the member of the Nordic Digital Humanities Society, and I have been participated in the conferences. Before that, I also was in the conferences that were organized by MIT in the United States. And I have had also very good collaboration with Jyväskylä University or Professor Rainer Koskima, who is also quite known figure in the field of digital literature. And besides that, I'm also curator of Digital Humanities minor here at Tallinn University, together with Marek Tamm and Terje Väljataga. This minor study program, it's in Estonian, and it is meant for students on BA level. But so far we have had it for 3 years, and I can say that this number of students choosing this minor is growing slowly, but still growing. And at first, when we got feedback from the students, they basically knew nothing about digital humanities, but after they graduated, they found that it's something very valuable and great asset also for their future career. And besides that, I have been also engaged in activities in Estonian Digital Humanities Society last year together with Mari Sarv and Marin Laak. I was one of the organizers of this Digital Humanities conference in Estonian National Museum, Estonian National Library. And right now, me and my colleague Marin Laak, we are compiling a special issue on digital humanities for the academic journal Metis. So that's the things that I have been doing, and I believe that besides this Estonian literature, I'm also keeping eye what is happening in the web concerning the digital literature. So that's briefly, and I can have about 2 minutes for questions before I have to switch to the other Zoom room.
Okay. So questions.
Well, when you look into internet or look at my profile in ETIS, you can find all my publications. I have published both in Estonian and in English, and I have also a book published in 2012. It was about postmodernism in Peter Lang Verlag, but there was also some chapters about digital literature and what were the developments here in Estonia.
Yes, yeah. Actually, Indrek, Marek, and myself have been accepted to the special issue for talking about the same one. It would be great at some point to once that comes to fruition to maybe present the special issue in like kind of a book release or something, we'd be happy to host this if you like. So it would be great to like have this as a kind of like cross-fertilization. I think one interesting debate which we could have in general, and obviously not now because you have to leave, would be what's the relation between cultural analysis in general, cultural questions in science, and what digital humanities can do, want to, and sort of where the overlap is. That I think is a really, really interesting kind of thing, because as we all know, in digital humanities, there are certain limits in peer review, and on the other hand, there are certain things that digital humanities can do and does, which doesn't happen in, say, natural science environments where people talk about, you know, cultural evolution or something like that. So I thank you very much. This is great. We should definitely, as you will see in the next semester, we have now set up the group, and now we sort of like try to like throw more tentacles to the outside and also like catch the tentacles that people throw at us. And so it's very great to have you, and we will love to collaborate also in the next couple of years, of course.
Yeah. Okay, that will be great. Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
And goodbye to everybody.
Yes, thank you. Okay, nice. So now we have time. Nobody has to leave, I guess. Peter, take it away.
Hey all. Yeah, thanks for organizing this. I really like talking about digital humanities and hearing about different varieties of digital humanities. So I'm happy to hear from you. And I guess this is somehow also what the society has been about, that it has been this loose aggregation of people with similar interests, like academic societies are. So we keep hearing new things when we meet each other as well. Okay, but for the personal background, so I have a background in semiotics and linguistics, and I've been interested in using these texts and digital methods to study historical processes of various kinds. My PhD has been, in fact, in Tallinn University, and I've looked at the standardization of Estonian in the late 19th century. We have focused on language prescription, whether this language prescription can influence people's writing. And I tried to combine in there textual data with various linked data, so where people were born, what kind of dialect background they had, and so on. And I think I found that prescription does play a role in what they choose. It's almost done, not quite submitted. So if you hopefully in the next few months I can share a link as well. I've been interested in various these historical topics. So this culture evolution, it's a familiar topic for me. We had a seminar a couple of years ago in Tartu. We studied some culture evolution of literary forms, of film crews, and so on. Some small things, so quite different, these DH-related projects. And yeah, I'm interested to hear what you do. But currently, I'm mostly dealing with two things that are born out of the PhD project, partly. So one, I'm trying to open up the archives of the National Library. I'm trying to find uses for the digital collections. So there's a really large newspaper archives and also print publication archives that have been sort of open for search, but not really open for text mining yet. So we're working with the library to make it easy. There's this sort of Jupyter Notebook-like interface for it, so people could get access to it. And also we're trying to find interesting uses for it. So if you have any projects in mind, then tell me, and we can figure them out. And secondly, for my own research, I'm involved in a rather large project in Tartu University that deals with large societal changes. So there's this thing we call industrial modernity, where people have kind of poor attitudes towards the environment, towards sustainability, are very hopeful for science and technology, kind of these optimists on this. And we're trying to study long-term trends via historical newspapers on people's attitudes, using some text mining techniques, and then getting these mainstream newspapers from a couple of different countries. I mean, simple methods, just keyword search, some topic models and word vectors, but it's kind of it's an ongoing process to operationalize these questions. But it's something that I'm very interested in. yeah, so these are the two main things. I teach a bit of DH in Tartu University as well, so I'm happy to talk about that as well and how to get people interested in it more. Yeah, but that's all I really wanted to say. So really looking forward to everyone's to meeting everyone.
Thank you very much. That's great. I'd like to emphasize a little bit like what you're doing here. Like on the one hand, it's very practical. On the other hand, there is also like some shared topics, right? This long durée kind of questions of, you know, where obviously we all use like state-of-the-art methods, topic models, vector spaces. For keywords, you could basically say standard methods. But the interesting thing is, I think, where Estonia has to be treated much like a city in a sense, right? Where there's like multiple universities, and we should not hang out in like our little niches and like sort of like, you know, only talk at international conferences with our collaborators. But it is an interesting thing of what we can do together and what's the differences in essence. I think that's a really, really interesting thing. And so there's a lot of like shared interest, like, you know, any historian is interested in longue durée, but at the same time, we all do it in slightly different ways and with slightly different setup and different archives and stuff like that. So there's a lot of opportunities. So thank you for laying it all on the table. Yes. Should we like just go around and continue with everybody and then, or should we take questions? Mila has a question. Maybe we should take questions. So it's fresh.
Yeah, I think we can do either way. I just kind of, you know, all the things that you do seem really very interesting, and I'd like to hear, of course, more. But one of the questions I just kind of like wanted to ask right now is that kind of like concerning the digitized collections at the Estonian National Library. So could you very briefly say what is kind of like, are the collections mostly that you are kind of like talking about? Is it like the newspaper collections, and how kind of like, what is the time span of them, and kind of like, yeah, could you just briefly tell a little bit more?
Happily.
Thanks.
Can I still share my screen or
should work?
Should work. Okay. So it's an ongoing process. There's one archive that's print publications, has about, I think, 20,000 print publications maybe there across, starting from 1850s towards now, more or less. And then there's the newspaper archives, which we have opened up already a bit. Ooh, I do believe that I crashed.
We cannot see your screen. Or
yeah, I cannot see my screen anymore either. Oops.
We can see you.
Can... Well, I need to rest. Okay, so I'll just keep talking if you can hear me. So there's a nice overview on data.diga.ee. I'll add a link in a couple of minutes. The newspaper collections, they're mostly open, like 95% open. During the last couple of years, there's a couple of closed ones. It has really good coverage from 1870s to 1940 approximately. The National Library has a large gap in the Soviet times, but there's current digitization is kind of improving that, so it should get better very soon. And the 1990s onwards, it's well, it's kind of mixed, like where they did offer the digitized sources were not. I think I would say it's like a bit less good than the earlier ones, but still quite useful. Yeah, but I'll link to a page that has nice plots on kind of what's available on the newspaper sites. Yeah, and I think I need to restart my browser.
That could be an interesting shared goal, right? Like as we map out what's possible, even in terms of you know, if you hang out in more you know, in the US, there are certain sources that are easier to come by, so everybody knows them, and then there are certain areas where there is some focus on, like the Caribbean. There's like 25 projects in digital humanities on the Caribbean, and they all have different coverage. But in all these regions like ours, for example, it's actually a good question, like what is the actual coverage? How much German literature, how much Russian literature, how much Estonian, how much none of these three literature is actually in the library, and what's actually the coverage in terms of like how they are prepared already, in a sense, whether we have metadata, where we only have cards, like paper cards, I'm pretty sure that exists too. Where do we have the entire material scanned and so on? And it would be great to create a situation where, because this will happen anyway, in 10 years, all of this will sort of be mapped. And then the competition is not who finds the data, but like, what idea do we have with the data? And I think that is sort of a situation where we all need to go towards. And I think, I don't know if Peter can still hear us, but
I can hear, yeah.
So I think that
I can see.
That's actually one of the major contributions you work towards. And I have seen that slide you probably wanted to show the different versions at 2 or 3 events before. And I think that is one of the, if I think about digital humanities in Estonia, that plot of the coverage of the National Library, for example, is one thing I have in my head now, right? And so that determines a lot of interesting questions and so on, like environmentalism without German 19th century literature is unthinkable to do here, right? For example. And so that is sort of something which is quite interesting, and we need to spread throughout this virtual conference room. Everybody should have that plot in their heads. And many other plots one can draw in that same vein.
I will link it definitely, and like it's because the use of it for text mining is really beginning. So I think nothing has yet been done. So it's really a nice Wild West to try everything.
Cool.
Still.
Cool. Should we continue with the next speaker? And then discuss more further? Okay, so is Mari Sarf in the room? I cannot see you on the screen. Oh.
I'm here.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yes. The stage is yours.
My name is Mari Sarv, yes, and I'm working at the Estonian Literary Museum, which is not actually a museum with exhibitions, but it is a research institution that combined with archives. And as we have large archives, and the main fields of research are folklore studies and literature and cultural history studies, and also life stories.
Nice.
And our archives have been digitized or databased since 1990s, of course.
Wow, okay.
So we already have quite large corpora of different areas of folklore and so on. And my field of research is mainly runa songs, which is an archaic poetic tradition we share with the Finns and Karelians and other Finnic nations. And I have had a very good experience with using computational tools or power or methods when I wrote my doctoral PhD dissertation on the meter of runa songs. So it opened up totally new information, like layer by layer. And I defended it in 2008.
Nice.
And later on, we of course have been working on with our digital materials and databases and archival info systems. But in 2013, we made a small conference or seminar on the digital humanities in Estonia, which was the first time the term digital humanities was mentioned in Estonian language, and which brought together then the people dealing with the computational studies in the field of humanities. And we wanted to bring them together, but at the same time to stress the necessity to integrate digital methods in universities' humanities curricula. Because in our literary museum, as we have so large corpora, we would need the researchers also able to work with the digital materials. But in humanities, you know, they do not teach it always. So one aim of this conference was also to stress the need to add this direction into university studies, and the conference series has been gone on 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Society of Digital Humanities, where I am also in the board, and is now kind of organizing the conferences in collaboration with some institution every year. So we would be happy if Tallinn University could organize the conference next year. Would it be possible?
Yes, I have to touch base with my fellows, but
Yes.
Yes, so I cannot say yes immediately, but I think that's a very interesting proposition, and I think it's sort of something which ideally we incorporate not only CUDAN but the whole university, because there's many other people, you know, like Pirit, right? But I think it's a very interesting proposition, and so I have been approached with this idea. Actually, I think before my job interview, it was sort of like when I was invited for the job interview, they also told me that the Digital Humanities Society wants to do a Digital Humanities conference. And then I remember we missed the slot for this year, but it's definitely a conversation we should have, I think.
Yeah. We discussed it last year with Indrek Ibrus and Marek Tamm, but this year I should have been writing to someone, to you or to them, or and asking if it would be possible next year. But now this is an occasion I could make this proposal.
Please touch base with us again, and so I will include my fellows who are now here, and so we can have a more educated conversation about. I didn't want to say yes without the people being hired.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there questions from anybody? I have one question which is very practical, but maybe somebody else should go first. Yes, Mila again.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I'm really curious about the kind of like the stage of what is being digitized in Estonia and what is not, because I'm coming from Finland, and I'm really curious to know what is the state of all this in Estonia. So I would also like to ask, could you, Mari, please tell a little bit more about this coverage of digitization of the sources at your institute? Like, I think that this folklore data and literature, and also you mentioned that you have like life stories of people with which I think is really, really interesting. So could you tell a little bit more what is mostly being digitized and kind of like what still remains to be digitized?
Yes, of course. For last some decades, most of materials we get is already in digital format. But of the old materials, there are, of course, manuscripts which have been digitized in order to lessen their use by like in analog format. And then the like databases or the textualization of folklore materials have been done genre-based mostly. So we have a database of Runo songs, which covers nowadays 100,000 texts. And there is 1/3 approximately yet to be done. So the work has been gone on maybe 20 years already, and the texts have been proofread and metadata organized, and also we have database of fairy tales. We have database of place lore. We have databases of riddles, like sayings and folk belief narratives, and what concerns life stories, then there has not been the process of digitization, but a big part of them are already digital because of they have been sent in digital format.
As video or?
Yes, we also have video and audio collections, and in Folklore archive, most of the old materials have been digitized already.
Nice, nice.
And from the literature side, there is a project led by Marin Laak of Kreutzwald's Century. And in the framework of this project, or related to this project, many of the first editions of Estonian literary classics have been digitized. Like, I guess all basically until some like date.
Nice.
And of course we have more, we have we have an archival library which collects all Estonian publication, like National Library, but like a parallel to National Library.
Okay.
It started as National Library, but nowadays National Library is in Tallinn, but and it has been also digitizing rare books we have from very old times, or manuscripts also sometimes, but this has been all happened in collaboration of the library's framework. They do not make differences. This is our data, this is their books, but it's like Estonian national program to digitize the most valuable old rare books.
Nice. Daniel has a question, I see.
Yes, thank you. It's probably on the back of Mila's question, is about the collections that you mentioned, and also Peter mentioned. So one aspect is digitization, obviously, but the other thing that might be interesting from the point of view of collaborations is the conditions of access to these collections, whether these are I mean, they're a collection of digital objects, but is there any, or how is the infrastructure for programmatic access to them, in the sense that do you have like, you collect like APIs to do this, or is it more of an ad hoc basis? If anyone wanted to use, say, the Folklore collection, how would it work in terms of research? No, is this a public open infrastructure service that's kind of ready to go, or is it more like a collection that needs to be accessed on a one-to-one basis? I suppose it's a very broad question, but and perhaps others might also want to chip in.
Yes, it is different. What concerns the like folklore collections and interviews of the recent times, they are we cannot make all of them public. We cannot make most of them public because it can include something that like there apply restrictions. But for the older material, sorry, my dog.
Coronavirus.
But for the older materials, it depends very much who is the owner of the or author of the database or corpus. We have API in our archival system, but our archival system does not include all we have in our databases. In the Runosong database, it is quite, you can download XML files, or if you want, but you have to log in order to get more than 1,000 texts or something. And for the rest of databases, I do not believe that they have specific access possibilities. There is also the problem of like place law. In case of place law, it is it tells about the archaeological objects sometimes that are we do not want to share the information for dark archaeology. And
okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the situation is not for the open access. We have a lot to work still. It's at the moment it is not very easily openly accessible. Vaur maybe may comment this. He has tried to use our photographs for his application.
I think the what I would do immediately when we would not be in coronavirus pandemic, partial lockdown, whatever, but if we could move freely, I think we should actually all mutually visit each other, and not only to CUDAN to see what kind of research goes on and discuss, but I do think all these issues you raise are quite important, right? So there's like, it's easy to say, oh, all the data should be open access, or you know, it's easy to theorize about like what it should be, but whenever we look at exactly such material in its whole, in its all wealth, in its complicatedness, in its differentiatedness, all of a sudden it becomes clear that there is no such thing as like, oh, digitize and then like, you know, you analyze and then the whole country is sort of like put upside down and you see a structure, but there's a whole lot of really interesting, many lifetimes of work in there. And it is important to understand, you know, who is interested in the analysis and for what. You mentioned dark archaeology is one thing. The other thing is obviously, you know, as a society, you have an identity that's based on the stuff that's visible, But if the stuff that's visible is like sort of locked down in a basement to 90%, then obviously the identity is built around like 2-3 pictures, which in the worst case is just a flag and whatever some politician says in the last 3 weeks. So there's some really interesting kind of thing to unfold in here, to unfold in here, which obviously only works together with researchers, analysts, librarians, people who collect this material in a painstaking manner, because obviously this is very, very hard won also. This is another interesting thing, right? And obviously we all need to make a life, including the people who run the archive. And the question is not like, how can we sort of like harness value, you know, for some company, whatever, but it's also how can we help you? Like what are you up to, and how can CUDAN, for example, which is now, you know, in these 3, 4, 5 years, something that's going on, how can we help the mission of this whole thing, while at the same time create better understanding and have a more advanced approach of cultural data analytics that didn't exist before, which obviously we can only develop also when we look at the complicatedness, not only the complexity of the data, which I think is a really interesting kind of thing. So should we go on with the, we can obviously bring up all the topics, all the people, all the thing again, but I think we should get a broader overview. So I just will continue with the next speaker, right? Does it make sense? Thank you very much, Mari. The next one would be Tanel Semri. And I hope I'm spelling your last name correct, because
yeah. Hi. You spelled it all right. So I have a background in archaeology. I have a master's degree in archaeology and also another master in visual anthropology, which would be, maybe I should explain, it's anthropology where, which is done with a camera, let's say. So we use film or video as a research tool, and also for presenting the results. I have also worked in private sector with software development. I'm not a developer myself, but I've been working in closely related positions like project management and technical writing. So I know a thing or two about coding. So this autumn, I actually applied to start to get the PhD position at CUDAN, but I was very close. It was a close race, and I wasn't selected. So now I'm an external PhD student at Tallinn University, and I still want to go ahead with my research program, which would be basically what I want to do is to use machine learning to analyze large amounts of visual cultural data, or let's say visual heritage, meaning archival photographs and maybe film. So basically it's using computer vision or machine learning based computer vision on visual cultural data. And since I'm an external student, then I also had to work to earn a living. So for a while I was working with data management at Tallinn University. Basically, there was this problem that people were let's say researchers are they need some kind of infrastructure to store their data that they're working on, and this hasn't been addressed in Tallinn University yet. So people are just keeping their files on Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever. So we were trying to come up with some kind of an alternative which would be acceptable for you know, scientific data, which is often there's lots of sensitive data or personal data, so it has to be, you know, kept under secure conditions. But this project has been on a pause now for a while. I'm still waiting if we can go forward with this or not. But in the meantime, I'm working with Estonian National Museum now, who are trying to, they want to open some kind of a media classroom, let's say, or a lab for where to teach visual anthropology and also to kind of experiment with media or digital heritage, like again photographs and old film, and you know, everything which has to do with culture and is in digital format. So it can be 3D models, it can be sound, whatever. So we want to buy basically some cameras and some editing computers and start teaching ethnology students at Tartu University, sorry, and also maybe school pupils from schools. So that's something I'm doing right now. Concerning my PhD project, it's progressing very slowly because I have to do a lot of other things. So I'm just taking general courses basically right now. But one thing that we want to do is use, again, to use machine learning on elevation data. All of Estonia has been mapped with a LiDAR quite precisely. So we have very precise elevation data available about covering all of Estonia. And I want to teach or train a model and try and look for archaeological sites or yeah, certain types of sites which are visible on elevation data. So we are working with Andres Kimber and we'll try to get that going somewhere. But yeah, as I said, time is really, there's not enough time to do all that. So everything is going kind of slowly, but still, so basically, yeah, I would say to sum up, I would say machine learning, computer vision, you know, cultural data, archaeology, anthropology, these kinds of keywords for me. Thank you.
Nice, thank you very much. Are there questions? So I may ask a question. Oh no, Mila had a question. I had no question before because Mila asked my question also. So I trust.
I'm sorry. Maybe I should, you know, maybe I should give room for others as well. I just kind of like, yeah. It really sounds really fascinating what you're doing, Tanel. And I would like to learn more kind of like what kind of visual data you are using in your PhD project. So did you say that you're using mostly like photographs, or are you using also like audiovisual, like video material, and what is the coverage? So what kind of data are you using?
I'm planning to use photographs, basically, yes.
Like Estonian contemporary or older ones?
No,
or
archived, older, yes. Possibly also contemporary. I mean, I have also thought about maybe what I plan to do is to detect certain objects on photographs. I'm especially interested in technology, so it can be some kind of technological artifact, let's say, I don't know, a bicycle or some kind of tool, and just see the occurrence of these certain types of artifacts and see if there's some kind of regularity over time or space, And also if certain types of artifacts occur together, maybe. So if a person is riding a bike, does he also wear glasses? You know, all kinds of co-occurrences would be interesting to discover. The first phase, at least, would be with old photographs, but it can also be used on contemporary, of course. So, for example, Google Street View is like an endless supply of visual imagery, and there also already has been done quite a lot of research on this. There was a research project where they detected models of cars on Street View, and then compared these car models to the socio-economical conditions in that part of the city. So they found correlations between, let's say, voting preferences. So if there's lots of pickup trucks, then this part of the city will probably vote for Republicans and so on. So yeah, it's basically endless, the opportunities.
So I have a kind of question. Like we had some discussion, like also like after the round of like when the fellows were selected, that we continued the discussion, because I think in general you have a very interesting kind of field of interest and also very interesting background. And what I think would be great, which this is a good forum, but obviously, you know, we should like sort of like have everybody introduced, but this is a good potential discussion we can all have, is, for example, this kind of interest, how can this be actually formed into something that forms a kind of project proposal that sort of fits together, right? Like, for example, you were talking about archaeological elevation data, which basically is like an elevation layer across the land surface, for which you can imagine there are satellite pictures, which are, you know, photographs or remote sensing multispectral, and then people take pictures on the ground. And so one of the key questions could be if it's interesting to actually recognize archaeological sites that we don't know yet, you know, some hill or a configuration of hills in the forest where there is something grown over, but it has a configuration with like, okay, this probably is something similar than over there. So the question is, how is this cultural analysis, and not just remote sensing, what people would do in GIS, but what is the other component, and sort of how can we come to a practical kind of project construction? I think that is a really interesting, because as you say, it's endless. And the question is like, you know, if you say we can do this and can do this and can do this, and then we could do X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. The key thing is like, how do we, you know, if you want to ask very straightforward what the difference between the 5 people who were selected and the people who were not quite selected is, they had exactly this kind of like construction where they say, I want to use this and that set of methods towards this and that goal. And then the question is obviously, it needs to be feasible, all right? And so you have a lot of feasible things going on. You have a really compelling background and you have a really compelling kind of mission. And the question is just like, how do you actually sort of like package the package in essence, right? And so that is something which I would, it would be a great discussion to sort of work together further. And so I want to totally also keep the discussion open towards like, you know, what can actually be done where you have ultimate fun and enthusiasm for doing it, but it's also feasible, and question basically what can we get out of it for cultural analysis in that sense, right? So
I'm planning to apply again next year for the PhD. So by that time, the latest, I kind of have to narrow it down and make it more like it's maybe a question of operation. What's that word? Operationalization.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have to work on it.
And there is probably a field also which is quite interesting, right? Like I don't know if there's if PFM or humanities gives us another PhD position, but like that, you know, there's many other ways I think fora like this, and this is also for everybody, should be an interesting situation where we can actually sort of put stuff on the ground and say, come up with these kind of methods. And then question A, is it feasible? Question B is, where do we get the money for? Right? So ideally, this together we act like a growth incubator, which the question is obviously an alignment of like what's possible in terms of like, can it be done? And also who would pay for that, which is a very big question problem for all of us, because, you know, in the last couple of 10 years, digital humanities was this thing that was funded in addition, just like cultural analysis is a thing or machine learning is a thing. But at some point, there is, you know, how do we sustain this? This is actually, I mean, it's literally one of the main problems of CUDAN, because it's like written out as a goal. So I would like to sort of like keep it at that, and then like sort of like have the next person and the next person talk a little bit about like what they have to say. But we can see that it's not only, and this is actually a typical thing in the Digital Humanities Society, like on one hand you have representatives of institutions, but you have also people who are really, really interested in a particular topic and therefore are engaged. And I think that is a really interesting also resource, but also a kind of, you know, common responsibility. It's like, how do we provide for each other the chances to actually, how do we create the opportunity space so everybody can not only have an interest, but also make a living off of it, which is sort of like, you know, ideally in 5 years, we're 10 times as many people and we have a life while doing exactly what we're doing. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? And so the next one will be Anders Kimber. Stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So, hello, yeah, my name is Andres Kimber and I'm a PhD student in archaeology. And for my master's and part of my PhD, I've mainly done spatial analysis using GIS software. But now, as part of my PhD, I'm also turning to agent-based modeling. So my interest lies, broadly in human environment interaction in prehistory, and to look at how, more specifically, to look at how early agriculture activities in Estonia changed the landscape, and to study what kind of human behavior, in more particular, resulted in the landscapes we're seeing. So I'm looking at the number of people, the intensity of their agriculture activities, and also looking at the carrying capacity of the landscape where the people were working on. So and agent-based modeling is an excellent tool for that. So what I'm essentially doing is there is a kind of a hypothesis of why there was a particular change in the land use of prehistoric people. So they went from this like really extensive agriculture strategy that required loads of land, and probably resulted in really scattered settlements. And at one point, it turned into a more intensive land use. So they started putting more effort into being able to get as much resources from one place as possible, and that allowed them to stay and put for longer periods of time. And I'm essentially looking at under which conditions does this kind of a change, could this kind of a change in strategy appear? And I think the agent-based modeling offers a great framework for that. So in my project at the moment, I've written a model in NetLogo, which is, I don't know, probably some of you are familiar with that. It's an excellent software. Essentially, it's a programming language made for agent-based modeling, but it's also used for teaching programming for 7-year-olds or something like that. So.
So does it take inspiration from Logo, the
Yeah.
When I was 7 years old. Nice. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, at the moment I'm at hopefully at the kind of a end phase of my analysis. So I'm doing extensive simulation runs or on randomized parameter value combinations, and trying to look from that which kind of parameters that I've put into the model have the most effect on the output of the model. And for validating the model, I'm using results from a pollen analysis. So in archaeology, pollen analysis is a really common method. So essentially, you drill into a bottom of a lake and you count how many pollen from different plants there are in different depths, and then you can say like, yeah, like 3,000 years ago, 80% of the area was forest and the rest of it was like open areas or fields. So, and I'm comparing how my essentially a formalized model of this non-formal or like a narrative hypothesis works out against this validation data. So yeah, I think yeah, that's enough for the introduction, and maybe there are some questions. So essentially, agent-based modeling and land use in prehistory. Thank you.
Nice. Any questions? I don't see any fingers. Daniel.
Oh, sorry, I left my hand up, but I don't. I mean, I have some questions, but I think
I have to ask a question
in this particular instance. I mean, I'm very interested in agent-based modeling, but and I'm really happy about the mentioning of logo. But other than that, I think maybe later more discussion.
For me, why it's why I essentially turned to agent-based modeling is to first to kind of test an hypothesis and to try to see some kind of emergent behavior behind those kind of silent archaeological artifacts and sites, to test out how well our interpretations so far hold up if we try to formalize them in any way.
So I encourage you to keep that conversation not only in the silence, right? Like, so some of us have topics which we discuss behind closed doors. You know, agent-based models, maybe not the first method that comes to mind when you think cultural data analysis, because it's sort of a model, like where you know data, or you have some data and you try to sort of fit it or approach it. But I think it's actually super important to have all these like silent sides sort of openly discussed, like what comes up. And then like from the simple thing, people explaining what's net logo, how does it work? How does a general agent-based model work, like from scratch? How does this happen, come to be? And then what's the problems in archaeology, which is, as we all know, archaeology is complicated. There's lots of detail. And then, you know, you can write the most awesome agent-based model, make it to PNAS, and then still it doesn't fit the data. But it's still a good agent-based model. And so the key question is like, that's, you know, sort of the eternal problem of the method, right? And so it would be interesting to actually sort of surface all that. And one thing that came to my mind while you were talking, I think it would be very great if we could put all the stuff on the table we have, and then at some point have, you know, get together and say, oh, can we incubate, for example, possible projects and find out what's missing. Sometimes it will be the data that is missing because it's not properly digitized, or we can't use it because sensitive. Sometimes the method is not quite here yet, or the method may not be the right one, or the method may be the right one. Sometimes, you know, we have different interests and we don't realize that they're actually more compatible than we think. And what's the most important thing is this: we live in the scarcity of funding. Like, the only thing that's even more scarce than attention is funding. And so therefore, it would be interesting to figure out how can we frame our problems so we can actually not only get funding, how to get joint funding, and how can we sort of like change the funding landscape in a sense that is more favorable to what we're actually up for together. Because otherwise, you know, we will not create a, you know, that is like sort of the success of digital humanities in the US, that somebody at some point said like, oh, there's this thing called digital humanities, and very much so was first and foremost a program in the Office of Digital, in the Office of the National Endowment of the Humanities, where they then set aside money, and then everybody called whatever they did digital humanities. The question is like, what would that be for us, right? So that, I think, is a really important question. And it should include agent-based modeling, for example. Yes, any more questions?
Can I?
Yes.
I think I should have asked it a long time ago already, but agent-based modeling, I'm sort of not a computational computer sciencey person. What does it actually do, like the basics? If you could just like quickly explain. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the main idea behind it is that essentially all systems or complex systems or processes can be taken apart into three parts. So you can have agents that have some kind of that is some kind of an entity. So it could be a person, it could be a company, it could be a city, it could be I don't know, a particle or something. And then you have an environment in which those agents behave. And then for a third, you have rules. You have rules how those agents interact with each other and with an environment. And from that, you essentially build a kind of a model that describes some kind of a behavior. And what it's
so it's a simulation in a sense, right?
Yeah, it's a you're building a simulation. Exactly. Thank you, Donna. And from that, you're how it differs from like more equation-based models is that these agents, these entities, that they could be really heterogeneous. So every agent is not exactly the same as like for example, if you want to model some kind of a simple behavior of people, every person has a different age, weight, eye color, whatever, or some kind of a more social parameter. So you can put loads of those things in there and look how from it's kind of a interaction with these simple rules and heterogeneous agents and quite complex behavior might emerge.
So I thank you very much for this explanation. I think one should, but the equation thing is sort of like we should extend, right? So because locally the rules in the agent, obviously we're working on a computer, so everything in a sense can be seen as a procedure or equation. And so everything is numerical, even though it may not look like that. But the interesting thing is that traditional models in the humanities and in the sciences, this is a really interesting difference, they have these like overarching generalizations. Like for example, in economics, you would have the supply and the demand. While in an agent-based model, every individual in the society would have their own demand, right? Like, you know, I don't know, I may feel less cold than other people, so I don't need as warm a jacket. So my demand for a really warm jacket may be lower than the average. So agent-based models sort of like get rid of or get over this issue that there is an average thing going on. So in the same way, you can think about communication, signaling between agents. Like it's used in cell signaling, it's used in like peer-to-peer interaction, as opposed to mass media where the same message is communicated and perceived in the same way by a broader society. And in physics even, you know, there was this, physics thought they could get away with what's called mean field models. Like, you know, all air molecules in the room I'm sitting behave the same. So I can on average say, you know, the movement of an air molecule is sort of the same, right? Well, actually in the presence of turbulence, this may do like this and this may do like this at the same time. That is not something you can model with a mean field model, but basically you have to sort of like model each individual particles in the worst case. And agent-based models happen somewhere in between. So basically instead of like having one equation, you have many systems of equations, and that's related to many approaches in computational social science, where you basically for every constituent of the system, you calculate something. But of course, there is in-betweens, like in addition to the three classic notions of our agent-based models, which is the agents, the environment, and the rules that govern them, you can add noise in all these systems, which is again, some sort of average. And so the key thing is, the problem is that this is still, it's complicated. Like, you know, this construction of the rules is a complication, which makes it harder to sort of then understand the complexity out of the simple constituents. And so at that point, it obviously, it's a clear breaking point where you can say, okay, if you call this digital humanities, we should be aware that we're probably losing out on 99% of the humanists who just didn't have equations and computation in their undergrad curriculum or grad curriculum. So it's very important that if we engage in stuff like that, whenever we do that, and that's sort of like one of my driving missions in all the research I do, we want to use the best methods, but we want to explain them so every last one of us can understand what's going on. And that applies not only to the humanists, it also applies to the, you know, how do I explain to the physicist that there is a multiplicity of opinion in historical data with gaps which they never encounter when they, you know, measure the temperature in water or something. That is something really important. So Hannah, I thank you very much for this question. It's very important that we ask these kind of questions, because it's not, the bad thing is not knowing what it is. The bad thing is actually sort of like not opening that channel and actually making this mutually sort of like open of what the gaps are. And of course, not everything needs to be explained in like the full plenum at all times, but you know, there should be, we should nurture each other to actually find these kind of things. And so, Hannah, you may have, like, if you say, okay, I encountered this the first time, like I was there before, like then we're skeptical about this method. Then from the other side, people are skeptical because they say, that's not data-based, it's a simulation. There's like some other stuff, people make stuff up. And like, as you do this, you find the value in itself, and you say, all the other people who you look at the data without knowing these models are wrong. So it's a constant process, very much as we had before with Mari, with the Ethnology Museum. There is so much complication in the system, in this model, just there is with the types of material where you cannot say, oh, let's publish all the data, have it open. But so that's sort of something where ideally we sort of learn what the garden of possible, the opportunity space of methods, digital humanities, of data, and of kind of the region, in this case, the Baltics and Estonia, is for us. So we can actually, even though everybody may do the same thing in Great Britain and Germany or whatever, we may be special because we have a special use case that's particularly interesting, just like people visit a Japanese garden when they have a garden center where you can buy every type of plant in essence, right? So that's something I would, so thank you very much. It would be great to maybe have a workshop on agent-based modeling at some point, right? It would be great. So let me continue, because otherwise we run out of time before the CUDAN people say a little bit about themselves. Thank you very much. So in the program, it says anybody else who'd like to say a quick hello. And actually in the chat, Kadri Wieder announced that there is also an opportunity to introduce the Center for Estonian Language Resources. And if you don't mind, I would actually send the link to everybody and give the stage to you so you can actually introduce it. Stage is yours, Kadri. You have to unmute.
Thank you very much. I also made a small presentation, or just pieces of information about the Center of Estonian Language Resources, which is a consortium of University of Tartu, Tallinn Technical University, Institute of Estonian Language, and also Estonian Literary Museum, where Marisaar comes from, is included in this consortium. And we are a kind of service center for researchers, mainly for digital humanities researchers, to collect and share knowledge, the dataset and metadata about the Estonian language in digital form. So we have a repository called MetaShare. It's a catalog of metadata of linguistic and knowledge and language datasets, but also metadata about tools for natural language processing for Estonian. Lots of them are open source, and also lots of our datasets are open data. And each registered dataset gets datasette DOI. This repository is harvested by Clarin Virtual Language Observatory. Estonia is also the member of Clarin, which is a common language resources and technologies European consortium, research consortium. So all our data is also harvested in this Clarin big catalog, but also there is a lot of information about language resources structured in the same way. So MetaShare also provides possibility for Estonian researchers to register and archive their datasets in a proper way, according to conditions of European Union, and also according to conditions of data management for researchers. So that's a very short introduction of myself and my work. Thank you. And if you have questions, also I can say something.
I think, Max, you maybe have to unmute.
Yeah.
You're right, I have to unmute. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for putting the links into the chat. So people who were waiting for a screen share, that is really great. And so I'm pretty sure lots of people have many questions. And so I assume they can also contact you if they go to the website, but would be interested in looking at language resources, right? Again, before we open the question, like one thing, maybe you can say a little thing about Clarin, which is a very vibrant, like Daraya, European digital humanities, literature, text-related initiative that is going on since quite a number of years and has is quite an interesting community of practice also. So is there anything to, like for people who work with language data in our group, for example, how can they get involved? How can they get data? And so what can they offer to you, and what can you offer for them in that sense? That maybe
yeah, if this data is in Estonian or somehow connected with Estonian language, then you are welcome to contact personally with me. Maybe it's the easiest way easier than send to info@keeleressursid.ee. But also, yeah, maybe it's the easiest way when you contact with me, because then we can make a tailor-made contacts and tailor-made things for you as well.
Thank you very much. That's great. Any questions from the audience? Just speak up. Okay. Okay. So yes, thank you very much. Then you also put the email into the chat, which is great. So you answered all the questions.
Yeah.
but thank you very much. I'm very happy that this happened. So in the meantime, there's another person who spoke up, who Vahur Puig, who said, I would like to give a brief overview of ayapike.ee. Yeah, take it away.
Yes, hello. So yeah, I really try to be quick. So basically my activity has been very applied. I have a background in museums on positions related to photographic collections and exhibitions. And so now for almost 10 years, I have been running a crowdsourcing platform called ayapike.ee that is dedicated to pictorial heritage. I can also share screen just very quickly. So, and this is something I think that we also, that probably we need a longer discussion and a longer presentation, because we have quite a lot of data that is really unused until now. So the idea is that actually when collections get digitized, mostly historic photographs, but also paintings, graphic art, and even moving image. So currently it's only or mostly only searchable by text and textual descriptions. And so we started with with one very specific task of geotagging the content, and we also had the option for users to add the so-called re-photographs or repeat photographs to the historic pictures, so that we can, this very, I think, well-known then and now thing, so that we can have a comparison of how the places have changed over the time. And by now we have, so we are mostly using public collections, pictures that are published on the museums portal or other open and public repositories. And so we have just built a tool or a platform for enriching this content. So we have almost 190,000 images, and so almost 120,000 have been geotagged. And so over the last 2 years, we've added several other tasks related to these images. So for instance, and it's very much really related to pictorial content. So we can for instance, indicate whether a picture is an interior or exterior view, a ground level or a raised viewpoint or aerial, etc. So, and until now, it has been basically very low tech. So we have almost not used any machine learning. Currently, there are some students from the University of Tartu in the data science course doing some project with our data, but mostly it is unused until now. And yes, so actually it's the project is run by a non-profit organization, a small non-profit called the Estonian Photographic Heritage Society. And as you, Max, mentioned also, of course, the issue for such an initiative, one of the biggest challenges is sustainability. So how to sustain such a platform that does not have a revenue model, actually. So it's a Wikipedia-like initiative just for pictorial content. So maybe that's all for a very quick intro, I guess.
Nice. Could you expand a little bit on that? Like Wikipedia-like, is that an option? Just dropping it into Wikimedia and then like basically sustain the user interface? Have you ever thought about stuff like that?
Sorry, can you rephrase your question? So mean,
you said it's a Wikipedia-like initiative. So the
yes.
question is like exactly that. Like, you know, obviously, is the material contribution-wise a Wikipedia-like initiative, or is it also something where the nonprofit, for example, would say, let's publish all the images like a MediaWiki archive in essence, right? Like, or is that something the state of Estonia should be convinced of, that this should be the case? Because I mean, this is obviously, it's a very valuable source, obviously, right?
Well, yes, it's all of that. I mean, actually, so one of the things is that we are open source and open data as well. So basically, we also have our own open data API. But the question, of course, is that, and we've been working on creating technical integrations with the wiki ecosystem, and there's a lot of work to be done. But the question with this content is that, especially in the Estonian context, the copyright status of the content is unclear. So there is really needed like a global copyright inventory in the public collections. And in that sense, we are also operating in kind of a gray zone. So like as we are actually republishing the content. Mm-hmm. So that's the tricky part. So we cannot migrate all this content to Wikimedia Commons, for instance. But what we can do, of course, is the data. And basically, we also want to have these rephotographs uploaded to Commons, so that there would be new connections between this content and the new entry points. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yeah, our openness is one of our fundamental principles.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I need to change the gallery because otherwise I don't see everybody. Okay. Yeah, I think that's like a project where there's immediately, I don't know if I feel that right, but it's like two proteins sort of like meeting. There's many attachment points, I guess, between what's going on in the lab. And so actually, this is a good time. Once we go around, you will see that there is a lot of interesting kind of overlap going on. But yeah, that is a really interesting initiative. And I actually do encourage, we should have a longer talk about this, where you give us a deep dive into the whole initiative, how it came to be, what it can do, and stuff like that. And we had a lunch conversation a couple of months ago where I already said this is something which is quite curious, that you do these rephotographs, which is exactly what the first photographers did with drawings. So they looked at the 16th century drawings, went to the ruin and took exactly the same picture, which is a really interesting thing. And so that is in itself also a cultural product in essence. And the question you can ask yourself, how often does that happen? Where do people do these rephotographs? Okay, so is there any topical question towards that introduction, or should we go around the CUDAN group? Who has a question?
More than a question, I just want to say it's, again, maybe for a larger conversation, but I wonder if you've reached out to Daria for, I mean, I think they'd be really interested in attaching this to some form of institution to guarantee viability in the future. So that's kind of something that I understand that they sometimes do, just to kind of comment and yeah, maybe just carry on with this conversation later. I think it's a great project.
Thank you. No, we haven't had, actually, to brief answer, we haven't had contact with Daria.
It's nice. That's another conversation we should have. Is also the question is like stuff that goes, because obviously your project is very individual, sort of entrepreneurially driven, while Daria is very institutional, and both of it is necessary. The question is what can the one thing do and what can the other thing do? I've also seen a number of funding applications that have failed, not because of me, that were operating exactly in this area because that was not negotiated. So this is a really interesting discussion point, where if one could be entrepreneurial while institutional sustainable, that would be a really interesting thing. So that is a really interesting interface there too. So we have half an hour to go. We already have covered a lot of mileage and material. So
Max,
yes?
sorry, I believe there is one more person who wanted to briefly introduce.
There's another.
Elle-Mari Talive, I think, at least in the chat. I don't know if you have seen.
Yeah, I didn't. Sorry, I did not see. Okay, yes,
no,
but
actually, I just wanted to say hello, and I also posted the link about our collections to a chat, so you can look at them. It's
we can give you a couple of minutes, so go ahead. You're very welcome. I'm very sorry that I didn't see the entry in the chat.
No, I was not planning to say anything. I am a researcher of literature, both at Under and Douglas Literature Center, which belongs to Estonian Academy of Sciences, and Tallinn University. And mostly I work in the museum department, and we have different collections from 2 writers, and we have digitized them almost all, and you can just look at the link if you want to know more. And I have tried to use some methods of digital humanities while researching literature by myself, but just now I am not doing that. But I'm very interested in listening to the things you are doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so now we're there. Okay, thank you very much. So we need to sort of return the pleasure and go a little around and basically say who we are and what we're doing. And so I will go last, I guess. Maybe you want to start with people who haven't spoken yet. Andres Karius, who is our link to the Digital Humanities Society of Estonia.
I'm Andres, I'm the link person. Yeah, sorry for all these emails I had to spam out to make this happen. Yeah, so I'm a linguist, I guess, and I'm mostly interested in why languages change over time. So I recently completed my PhD at NB University in a research group called the Center for Language Evolution. And in my thesis, I used a combination of corpora and natural language processing methods, but also some simulations and also an experiment, which I'm just now writing up. And the experiment was a sort of an artificial language learning / communication experiment, people in the lab. Yeah, and now at CUDAN, I'm continuing my linguistics research, but in the last few months, I've also found myself working with stuff like global land cover raster data and also painting databases. So it's an interesting time for me because I now have people around me who know about all these different fields, like art and film and literature and things. So I'm interested in applying the sort of methods that I've been applying to language data and corpora to apply them to various other domains of cultural cumulative evolution, I guess you could say, and basically see if that works. So nice. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. Ksenia.
Hello, my name is Ksenia, and I'm Senior Research Fellow at CUDAN Open Lab. I'm a computer scientist, and I'm working mostly with social media data, Instagram in particular, and I'm focused on studying cultural and urban dynamics. And basically, I want to learn which museums are popular, what people are doing there, and how to make some exhibitions successful. Thank you.
Nice. Viune.
Hi, my name is Viune Žemaitite. I'm also one of the senior research fellows. I finished my PhD a couple of years ago in Deakin University in Australia, I work mostly within cultural and creative industries with a focus on cinema. In my PhD, I used cultural economics and I guess statistical methods to analyze a database of film screenings. I was tracking how films move around the world. And now, since my PhD, I also work a lot with gender, the gender aspect of the cinema industry, both at the level of distribution. So, you know, how do women's films do in theaters and how do they get there, as well as at the production level, looking at what films get made and in what gender compositions of creative teams. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mila.
Okay, yeah, so my name is Mila Oiva. I'm a cultural historian and senior research fellow at CUDAN. I'm specialized in, well, I did my PhD on Polish and Soviet foreign trade relations, but after that I have been doing some digital humanities related things. I was involved in a project in which we studied the best practices of facilitating digital humanities. And in connection to that, I co-edited a special issue at the Digital Humanities Quarterly that is out now. And I have been studying the spread of news globally in the 19th century press in this kind of like oceanic exchanges project. So I have been mostly dealing with text. At CUDAN, I'm mostly interested in studying circulation of knowledge, and I do that with the help of a couple of different kinds of research projects. Currently, I'm working on spreading of false information on history in Russian language internet, like, you know, and discussion forums and blogs and so on. And I'm also interested in starting to study kind of like circulation of footage in the Soviet newsreels. So kind of like this would be kind of like a leap to unknown and to study more kind of like visual and audiovisual data. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is random today. All the senior fellows first. Daniel.
Oh, hi, my name is Daniel. So my background, my first degree is in design. I have a background on that, and I also had a graduate degree, an MA in film and media studies, and I recently completed my PhD in digital humanities department at King's College London in the UK. I am mostly interested in critical machine vision, just to say some form of cultural, I suppose, social and cultural machine vision, more specifically in computational aesthetics, which can broadly define as an approach to the study of audiovisual culture that kind of cuts across traditional arts and humanities research and scientific computing via interdisciplinary design. No? So a regular thing that I usually tell people is that I try to teach computers how to watch films, and that usually gets a nice conversation. It's a nice conversation starter. At CUDAN, I'm very interested in working with people from different disciplines, so visual as well, but obviously also text, but also evolutionary, from an evolutionary perspective, in kind of tracking how things change over time. I think that's a common interest of many of us. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. Tilman.
Hello, I'm a PhD student and a junior research fellow at CUDAN. And I'm a trained artist from the Bauhaus University in Germany, and I'm trying to implement scientific methods into my artistic research, which is about the algorithmic curation of artworks, or in other words, the collaboration, the human-machine collaboration for exhibition making. that makes sense. So I'm looking into recommendation systems and trying to find a way to make that more explorative and more intuitive to work with cultural artifacts.
Thank you very much. Hanna.
Yes, hi, I'm Hanna. I'm also a PhD student at CUDAN, and my topic is related to legacy media and how they use data when we compare it to new media. And then why I do that is because there is a competitive edge to Google's and Facebook's of the world. And then the question is if legacy media offers an important platform for, let's say, public debate and discussions, then how could they potentially use data to innovate either their content production or business models? So yeah, they could compete better. Yes, and I try to go into these organizations to study them, and also will try to see whether they will share some data that they use in their organizations. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mar.
Hi, I am Mar. I'm a PhD student and junior research fellow in CUDAN. My research is about latent space navigation and exploration. Basically, I'm doing interfaces that it deals with this amount of endless possibilities that the AI models has, either text, audio, or images. And I am doing the audiovisual art track in the BFM, means I have an artistic background, but also a computer science background myself, and also design, because I did 2 BAs and 1 master. And yeah, I'm exploring these artistic interfaces that can find new insights on exploring these AI systems that generate content, synthetic content.
Thank you very much. Jan.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Jan. You probably have seen me actually quite many times during the Digital Humanities conferences a couple of years ago, because I recognize your faces definitely. But nice to meet you here in this environment. I'm a PhD student in School of Humanities. I study digital culture of online dating, and specifically employing digital methods and computational approaches to study a large corpus of data. And yeah, I'm also interested in how algorithms play the role in this trio of service provider, service user, and the algorithm.
Thank you very much. Mark.
Hello. So I'm also under CUDAN as a PhD student in cultural studies, and my topic deals with, so my background is in semiotics, and my topic deals with how to analyze cultural other with this cultural data analysis methods, basically. And of course, it will also, and I will also look into general, perhaps, cultural transmission dynamics and cultural patterns that might come out of it and imply some cultural semiotics perspective, also from a critical viewpoint of it. Yep.
Thank you very much. And then we also have Antonina, who is not a CUDAN PhD student, but a BFM PhD student, but she hangs out with us.
Yeah, I'm like a Schrödinger cat, not in CUDAN, but in CUDAN at the same time. So can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Ah, nice. So yes, my name is Antonina, and I'm a PhD BFM student, but my topic is closely related to CUDAN because I want to create an online art school that will use, reuse, and produce cultural data. So my background is in arts. So I was trained as a set designer, as an artist, and I worked for quite a long time as an art teacher. My master degree, I got my master degree from the University of Tartu, which was in the educational technology. So this is how I got into my PhD. So I want to connect art education, technology, and cultural data together to create some very nice and useful product. Thank you.
Nice, thank you very much. So I summarized all the intros from the CUDAN side into a quick walkthrough in the interest of time, so you can strategically spread your questions across all the CUDAN members. It's now 3:45, so we have 15 more minutes. And maybe you have questions from your side, but in general, I think, you know, it was already a great kind of exercise from both sides, I think. And so there's many open avenues, but if you have questions or particular ideas, you know, ask questions, or like also say, oh, we should do X, Y, Z. Like, you know, if you have something that immediately swims up on your brain, like maybe this may be a good moment to sort of like seed other brains to think about the same thing. So who wants to jump in?
I have a question to Mark.
Okay.
Yes.
What's your research material?
Yeah. So I will have to specify it, but the most probable material. So it will be text probably, and I'm not that strong in digital methods yet, but I will probably get more acquainted with natural language processing, and then probably analyze how the cultural other is represented in well, news journals. And so it's good that it's a kind of available data set in Estonian. So that's like one possible way to begin with.
And the time frame?
So time frame, it would be the more the merrier. the bigger amount of data I can hoard into, the better, because the goal would be to look at some really the general patterns, not that specific like changes in a couple of years, but yeah.
Like you can use 100 years of newspapers, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Ideally, yeah.
Thanks.
So we're looking actually for interesting sort of comparative examples. So one of the key denominators of the CUDAN PhDs is that they're encouraged to work article-based, like, you know, 3 articles instead of monographs, so we can actually look at things from different perspectives. And so obviously there is a number of things that lend themselves to, like, what the cultural other can be a philosophical semiotic discussion of what that actually means, which is important to sort of like come up with better models. There are certain things of like, how are other people called in texts? But then one of the research questions is also, what are the kind of materials you can actually analyze in that sense, right? And it's like, I mean, there's just very simple things, like when foreigners say France, and when do they say Paris? And so where? And so the question is like, you know, what actually means other? Where is there such a thing as like inside, outside? Is there a kind of thing like blocks, or, you know, in a clustered matrix that are discrete, like Estonian versus Finnish? Is that a thing? But, you know, obviously if you look at our passports, it is, but, you know, I'm German, but I'm Bavarian. There's something very similar going on in the late 19th century as Peter was describing for Estonian language in Bavarian. And so it was its own entity. And right now I'm German, but my dialect is much closer to particular parts of Austria. And, you know, the way how, you know, culture works is much more similar to Italy, say, or Spain than it is to Northern Germany. So that all these questions not only is there a concrete analysis that we need to do, but we also need to sort of understand what's the analyzable space of phenomena in a sense, right? Which is not something that is straightforward. And so that's one thing we, from not only from the PhD, like in this case Mark's side, but also from the project as a whole, it's part of the larger construct of CUDAN is actually to say, okay, if you go beyond language, visuals, audiovisual, but what is the common phenomena space in essence? And that's a really good example of one of these spaces. So one product may actually be what questions can we ask? Because we don't know. Because if you look at your folklore material, there's a whole universe of things, of otherness and the sameness and things going on, right? Isn't it? So yeah, who else?
Sorry, I missed the very start of our meeting, but did you tell something about yourself? What are you doing?
What am I doing? Yeah, exactly. No, I did not talk about myself. I typically do at the beginning of such meetings, but I was asked to cut it out because the first speaker had to leave for her class. So I can, of course, talk about myself a little bit. So my PhD is in art history with a little bit too much classical archaeology, because I worked on monument documentation, basically of ancient monuments, which may be sculpture and architecture, and you have Renaissance drawings. And so people in the wake of the so-called Warburg School, starting in 1947, have built this database over half a century of these kind of like documentation events. And what came out was the Census of Antique Works of Art and Architecture known in the Renaissance, which was one data set I analyzed in my PhD. And because it made a separation between what's depicted, the monument, and the depicting object, the drawings, I thought like, okay, I want to do a stratigraphic cut through history, through visual history, and actually pick one monument genre, Roman baths, which are large and therefore complicated and people make mistakes, so it's sort of quite thankful to look at, that is documented, but then later on there's archaeologists and literature about the documents. And I thought like, okay, they're all just physical documents, and physical documents can be depicted, but they can also have a meaning depicting something else. And so these two things were sort of the basis of my PhD. And what came out was the title of the PhD summarizes it, which is Reception and Visual Transmission as Complex Networks. So both of these things, both the similarity of objects that depict the same thing and one being connected to the other via visual transmission, are complex networks. And after that, I joined Laszlo Barabasi, who's a well-known physicist who does network science, as a postdoc. And actually sort of expanded over the landscape of possible networks, because I, in my side hustle, because I'm a first-generation academic, so I had to work while studying. So I worked for a database company doing large knowledge graphs. That's how we call them now. And I found out there's like all these weird things going on. And so the networks, the complex networks in my PhD were only the first. And I was like, okay, that's the most straightforward one, but there's many different complex networks in these databases. And that's how I started sort of my practice, which has sort of two sides. One is to map the landscape. Like typically I take databases, I look at like all the different constituents, even the ones which people are not interested in, right? Like there's, for example, if you have the Center for the Estonian Language, I would take their database, which supposedly is about language, but there's other things in there, maybe more about people than about language than we think. And so like that, I sort of try to find interesting things, and via my true topic, which is either networks or complexity or these phenomena which we find like right now. Obviously, one of the main questions is this multidimensional latent space of meaning, thought, and conceptual space. Can we describe this? Can we map this space? And what are the kind of things that we can maybe name in there, which we don't know yet? And so that's sort of like my kind of my interest, mapping and understanding very much in a Richard Feynman kind of sense. Can we build a model of something like that, of this conceptual space? And with that very interesting journey, I had the privilege to work with physicists, computer scientists, humanists, theoretical and practical, typically with a common lingua franca, which is very much also a lingua franca here, and in digital humanities increasingly so, which is figures. So we look at data, we not only write text, but we do these depictions, which then themselves become a subject of study. And so even though we compute, we measure, we study, do qualitative inquiry in a hermeneutic way, typically it's happening via figures as a kind of critical aesthetics, like we look at data, creative aesthetics because we produce the figures, and again it becomes critical aesthetics. So it's that kind of aesthetical kind of research in a very visual way. Like that's sort of what I'm doing. The most important things supposedly or arguably I've done is a paper in Science magazine where I did about 85% of the work, which is called a network framework of cultural history, which was published in the same day with a video called Charting Culture. The video was published in Nature, the paper in Science magazine. That took about 3.5 years, was the equivalent of a book. And my dean in the humanities then said, oh yeah, you wrote 3/4 of a page because you have 6 more co-authors. So it has no value for your tenure case. So I don't do it for that kind of stuff. I do it because I thought like, maybe as an art historian, I can make it to Science magazine, which may be a snarky idea, but obviously there is some value in there because it's a form of research which is not mainstream, but I want to make it mainstream because there's other people like me who like this kind of research, and it's feasible and we can do it and we learn something out of it. And so very much my goal in CUDAN is to create an environment where these kind of multidisciplinary endeavors are possible between the schools, between researchers that are in, all over the world, because this multidisciplinary cultural research is very, very definitely a global thing. Like I just recently had a paper out with a group of Korean physicists on art history, which is obviously very hard because you encountered traditional humanists in peer review. Like, how do you actually convince them while still not selling yourself that you're actually doing proper information theory a la Shannon? And vice versa. How do you not sell out art history while working with people who may not be familiar and have not 10 years of art history in their pocket? So that is a really interesting thing. So it's this academic mixing, not only of methods, but also of people, to find these issues which are interesting, which I think are very, very, at the core of my activity right now. And I very much see myself, of course, I also need a life, but and meaning publications, but I very much see myself in this function as an enzyme to bring people together, like in this particular discussion, that may not meet each other and may think things, like I think I have worked with people in the same room for a couple of years who use agent-based models. I know what's possible with it. I know what's the limit. But I also work with people, I met a lot of people who don't know what an agent-based model is. I know many people who are skeptical of it, and I know many people who are fascinated by it. And that kind of negotiation, which I think is really interesting, was like, when is the moment where we want to have an agent-based model? When is the moment where we can forget about it and not know what it is and still have a life? When should we have the phone number of somebody who knows what this is and actually do it? So drawing the landscape of research is very much also a goal, not only making progress. And as research is also conceptual, multidimensional space, you can see there is a kind of yo dog kind of joke going on, where at the same time we want to understand culture, but research is a culture too, and we want to understand the culture of research also. So that's what's driving me, and that's sort of a very personal kind of summary of what I'm doing. Other than that, as I said, I'm Bavarian. I lived in the US, in Texas. I lived in Italy for 3 years, in Rome, and I lived in Switzerland for a year, and in Boston for another 3 years. So that's sort of the journey I've took until I arrived in Estonia. So I'm very much a scientific nomad in that sense. And for now, I hope I will settle in Estonia forever. No, I'm kidding. Maybe yes. So I'm very, very happy to work with all of the people in the CUDAN team and also with all the people in this room right now. I think it's very, very fascinating, and I can only iterate the possibility we have here in Estonia. It's not only that we can do other things, but Estonian. It's the home of cultural semiotics, which is rooted in Bertalanffy and, you know, Uexküll. There's Jüri Lotman Center in Tartu. One of the first symposia I did was about also Ernst Cassirer and Lotman and so on. And that is very much the school where I'm coming out of. So there's complexity science, networks, that is sort of at the cutting edge of digital humanities globally also, while there's cultural semiotics, which has the same roots. And that complexity science includes also biology, physics, chemistry, and so on. So there is, if we combine these two streams, we can build something which is of very, very global relevance. And I strongly believe in that. And as one of my fellows sort of put it, there's really a great insight we can produce in this project and in the coming years as a country with our international collaborators. And I think that's what's fascinating me the most. I'm highly enthusiastic about being here. And I think Tallinn University is the place, Estonia is the place, Europe is the place to hang out right now and do great work and have a multiplicity of novel understandings in culture.